The Center for Teaching and Learning is showcasing faculty innovations in and out of the classroom and creating a space for faculty members to share ideas and learn from each other's experiences. This is one of a series of informal conversations where we ask a faculty member to describe their innovative practices. We'll definitely have time for questions at the end, and you're welcome to add your questions to the chat. We're speaking today with Marcella Del Signore, Associate Professor and Director of the Master of Science in Architecture, Urban and Regional Design Program in the School of Architecture and Design. Marcella started at New York Tech in 2017, and she holds a Master's in Architecture from Sapienza University. Am I saying that one right?
Yes.
All right, Sapienza University in Rome, and a Master of Science in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University. Before joining New York Tech, Marcella was at Tulane University, where she taught architecture and served as the director of the Rome Study Abroad program. She was also appointed the Kylene and Brad Beers SE Endowed Professor at the Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking. Marcella has also collaborated and taught a variety of academic institutions throughout Europe and the United States. Marcella, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Francine.
Our
I'm
pleasure.
really happy to be here.
What course is your absolute favorite one to teach? I know you teach a lot of courses. What would you call your favorite?
Yes. So as you mentioned, I joined New York Tech in fall 2017. And one of the, so since fall 2017, I've been coordinating the visualization sequence in the School of Architecture and Design. And this has been one of the courses that I taught since then. The visualization sequence looks in particular at how the students develop visual communication, but also how they begin to engage with technology from day one, and they begin to connect design and how they represent ideas, let's say. So it's in the School of Architecture, we have three courses, which are part of the visualization sequence, VIS 1, VIS 2, and VIS 3. And these are taught specifically between the first and second year. So the students are able to engage with the technology, especially working with the laptop directly from day one, and also begin to connect the specific workflow for representation and thinking in combination with the way in which they begin to see things and represent. Some of the visualization courses for sure are, one of my favorite to teach, and I've been teaching this for the last 4 years since I joined New York Tech. And also, I love teaching first year. This has been my passion since I started teaching. I've been also, and specifically in the School of Architecture, I always taught within the VIS sequence, but also first and second year. And in particular, first year, first semester is something that I really enjoy teaching, but also it's one of the class that I have to say it's challenging because the students come in with no knowledge. Maybe some of them already have done some drawing courses or some architectural courses or architectural thinking, but we really engage with the students from day one in terms of how they begin to structure their mind to begin to see things through the eyes of spatial knowledge, architecture, and also how they begin to visualize and represent and communicate their ideas.
That is such a nice way to put it, structuring their mind to become disciplinary thinkers.
Yes.
So I remember talking with Bill Palmore maybe 10, 12 years ago about the visualization courses. And we had this conversation about how the students were coming in wanting to learn, well, then it was CAD, wanting to learn the technology so that they could get summer internships. And the faculty, yes, that's valuable, and also didn't want them to lose the drawing and the sense of actually drawing out your ideas. And if you're sitting with a potential client and you can draw on the napkin, right, sketch out your ideas very quickly. Yes. How do you balance that now?
Yes, so we always put a lot of focus between the translation between the analog and the digital. So students from the first semester, they learn how to think through modeling, 2D and three-dimensional modeling, through the computer, through the software, but also they draw by hand at the same time. And so in the end, I think it's not a specific tool that they learn, but the thinking behind and how they start to translate ideas into representation format. And so, for instance, in the first year and second year, we always have a strong emphasis on not only drawing, but also on making. And this is allow the students to bring the ideas out from the computer, let's say, and begin to actually fabricate. So one part of the visualization sequence is not only to draw and represent, but also be able to make physical models as well. So through some of the courses look at digital fabrication through the digital fabrication labs that we have in the School of Architecture and Design, in particular looking at laser cutting, 3D printing, and CNC as well. And so these are very interesting way for the students to begin to, again, not only translate and represent what they think, but also understand how they can make things through particular workflows and through particular ways of understanding material, tectonics, and assembly, let's say, as well, of particular spatial systems. So we have a lot of emphasis on that too.
It's fascinating to me because there's so many layers, because they're looking at things in 3 dimensions and then representing them in 2 to be built into 3. And then there's all the layers of the materials and the structures and the weight and
Yes.
it just fascinates me. When you were a student, was there a particular teacher who changed your approach to teaching? Or have you had a student who changed how you approach teaching?
Yes, so I did my undergraduate studies in Italy, and then I did my graduate studies at Columbia University. So different approaches, I would say, and different teachers. But I always I think some of the teachers that really helped me to understand the approach to teaching as well were the ones that put a lot of emphasis on thinking about design through iterations and through feedback loops. So I always tell my students that you can continue design until, whatever design problem we give you or whatever challenge, let's say, you're asked to respond to, you can keep designing until the end, and for 3 years, 4 years. But the important thing is that I think, in architecture and design is important to understand that the process is never linear. So even if you move from point A to point B, in order to move from point A to point B, you have circles in between, meaning that you go back to the same point, then you continue to move along the line. But so there is a lot of feedback loop and iterations that the students have to go through in order for them to develop the idea, refine the idea, find new ideas, and be able really to bring to the surface the way in which they want to develop the project specifically. And of course, every year is different from first year to fifth year and graduate students.
Right. I think the challenge is knowing when it's done, right?
Yes, it's never done. So and I think this is also when we go in the profession, and so of course, has to be done at some point. But design, it's open. I see design as an open process, which means that you can continue to design different aspects at different scales, and so that's why it's never done somehow.
Right. So when COVID hit and we all went remote, and we knew in the summer that we would be remote in the fall, right? And so you had the opportunity to think more intentionally about how to transition out of the studio.
Yes.
How did you adapt? What did you change?
Yes, so in architecture, the studio culture is very important. So it's really the core of the pedagogy and the teaching. But I have to say that in our school, we moved, from studio to remote from, the next day, because all our students work with their laptop. So we have the laptop policy within the School of Architecture. So the students really start to work with their laptop from day one. And we were able to move, I would say, in a pretty fluid way from the classroom, physical classroom, into the remote classroom. And of course, one thing that it's missing, especially looking at the studio culture and how this affects architecture and the development of the project, is the fact of being together and exchange ideas and being in the same space, sketch, go back. And so all the feedback loop that I was talking about, but for instance, through Zoom or other educational technologies, we were able to recreate somehow the studio environment. And I think students are quite focused, I would say, when we work with them, especially with the studio. We have crits, so I think we were able to adapt quite well. And of course, one thing that we are missing is the making component, the production component, and the physical models. So that's something that we look forward to see how can embed it back into the teaching and the pedagogy.
Right. And the students, how did they respond?
Yes.
Well, how did they respond really? I suppose I'm thinking about how studio is so different from all the other courses,
Yes.
because the other
Yes.
course can go remote so easily. And how did they shift back and forth?
Yes, I think there are, I would say, maybe three types of courses in the School of Architecture. One is more studio based, one is more in between, like a lab. I mean, like, of course, not only in the School of Architecture, in other departments as well. Like the BIS courses are a lab, so we work between design and tutorials and theory, and then we have classes that are more looking at the theory. So I think the students, maybe at the beginning, like all of us, were I think we all went to a transition to understand how we can not only adapt but also be able to see how we can work with the technology, with the way in which certain things can be translated. And I think some things are even better, I would say, specifically some of them, and the way in which the students are able to engage. So I look forward in a way to, of course, go back in person, but at the same time, I think things won't be back as they were, and we can talk more about that.
What was better?
I saw, for instance, in the BIS classes that I was teaching, the students were quite focused. So usually, it's 3 to 4 hour classes, and of course, we don't do the same thing for 3 hours. So we have a sort of pin-up and review where the students present the work, and then we go to the tutorial component, and then we have one-on-one, not only desk crits but supporting the students. I think they were quite focused and very really focused, I would say, in the tutorial component, and really to provide a feedback for the entire class. And so always I think the question is, how do we, at the beginning at least, how do we keep them engaged, how we make sure that everybody respond to the collective production of the work. But I think I see students really, be engaged more and more, and really being able to participate in different forms.
Do you feel like they felt a sense of community, especially the freshmen, right? This was their first contact with
Or
you
yes,
and with their peers. Did
yes.
did they form a community, do you think?
Um, I think a different type of community, I would say. I mean, I saw the students were helping each other a lot, maybe much more,
Mhm.
because of maybe the challenges, not only the fact of not being together in the same space, but also the challenging through the assignments. Uh, I saw the students were there for each other,
Mhm.
uh, through chat groups or other ways of creating, virtual communities. And some of them, especially for the freshmen, I mean, they really, they still don't know each other in person. They haven't met in person. So, and but I saw, like, a lot of support. They supported each other a lot in terms of the
Oh,
production of the work, and especially with the these classes, technology support as well.
that is really good to hear. I see them in Manhattan, right, on the elevators with their models, and there's such a
Yes,
camaraderie among
yes,
the students.
yes, yes,
So it's nice that they could keep that.
yes. But I think we're all more open and flexible to change now, to changes that might happen. And maybe we can talk more about this in terms of how this is impacting all of us in terms of thinking about the current and future condition of education. But on the other hand, I see the students that, especially for the studio, that really want to go back in person, especially for the studio component, not much for the seminars, but the studio component.
Right, right. Before we think about the post-COVID world,
Yes.
I have one more question about what has been so far, which is sometimes everything just gels in a class and everyone's aligned and you and the students are fully engaged and it's just this transformative moment. Can you tell us about one of those moments in your own classes, either
Yes.
remote or in person, either
Yes.
way?
Lots of moments like this, I have to say, and even in this semester, so I'm teaching actually the graduate students the last studio, which is the more research-based studio, and I see that, for instance, the studio that I'm teaching right now looks at way in which each student chose their own site and their own topic, looking at how we can engage different scales of architecture, from interior to architecture to urban design. And I think some of the, let's say, memorable moments is when the students are able to share um, uh, thoughts in relation to how architecture can impact the world, and how the discipline can really make an impact in the way in which we think and the way in which we act. And some of the topics that, again, not only in the studio but also see this in the undergraduate, students are more and more, I would say, engaged within the to really see how architecture can have agencies in the way in which we think about production of not only spaces but really, for the larger society. So some of these moments, I think, when we have discussion but also students begin to exchange resources, ideas around these topics, to me are very important and interesting moments within the way in which we teach, and we're able to support the individual development within the collective environment of the studios.
It just sounds amazing to me. I think of some of the projects that have happened in the School of Architecture where you are going out and impacting other communities, and you can't be a passive learner in
No.
architecture.
No, no. And I think it's very important to, not very important, but the question is how we can engage the students, of course, at different scales, but also the I see, for instance, for the studio that I'm teaching right now, the fact that each students had to choose their own topic and their own site, and really the research question and that they had to respond. This really empowered them in order to really take ownership of their thinking and their design process, and to really own the work. And so this particular studio, the students have been working for 2 semesters in the fall and the spring, looking on research first, and then now in design development. And so all of them have, looked at relevant question, I would say, within the current moment, and how they can bring, uh, contribute through the discipline of architecture and urban design.
Do you ever try to encourage students to get out of their first inclination and to think about a box that's not their own?
Yes, always, always.
Tell me about that.
Yes, I think the in a way, I think I see, at least in architecture, it's our role to begin to, not to begin, but to see how, through the question that we ask the students, to really push the way, number one, they see things. I was referring to first year, and that's why I love teaching in first year, because when the students come in, they see things with certain eyes. And then in 2, 3 weeks, everything changes already. So they begin to see space, they begin to see uh, everything, the way in which they walk, the way in which they engage with the city, the way in which they engage with space in a different way. And I think this goes all the way to the graduate students, where they engage with more, not more relevant, but questions within the discipline that can really provide impact within smaller community, larger communities, and the world as a whole.
So you've been dropping hints that you have some thoughts about what will happen after the pandemic becomes an epidemic and slows down a bit. What do you think will stick around from all of the innovation and the rapid change and the creativity we've had to have in the past year? How do you think it will change teaching and learning going forward?
Yes, I see programs becoming more agile and more. I think not only in our university, but throughout everywhere. I would say, and I think modes in which people, will come together and in a classroom format is changing, and it will change, and I think this will remain. This, I think, opens the door to modes in which we can uh, create different teaching and learning communities, I would say, both locally and globally. So I'm thinking, like in our school, we do a lot of international workshops. We've done in the past, we will do in the future. So this is already the fact that, for instance, this semester we were able to have exchange between students in different countries, much more than, in the past we had to travel and actually do the workshop in that specific country or university. So this, I think, it will not only will remain, but actually will grow. And on the one hand, I think with the modality of teaching, but also the way in which um, programs would be delivered, but also developed. So I see a future that is much more agile and both the courses and the classes, but also way in which we can create communities around teaching and learning.
That sounds good to me.
So
um,
that's it. I think we're very lucky, and it's to be able to strategize and think about really how we can support those processes.
yes, yes, I agree. Um, so I always like to wrap up these conversations with recommendations. Is there a particular app or a technology tool that makes your teaching better, helps you streamline preparation that other faculty might like to know about, might find helpful?
Yes. So one app or tool that we have used within the School of Architecture, it's Miro. And Miro, it's a platform that in a way recreate a virtual environment for students to pin up the work and to be able to have a sort of collective pin-up space for the studio. And of course, you not only can pin up, but you can draw and you can add comments, post, etc. So Miro is one platform that we have been using within the School of Architecture, and it's a way to create a virtual classroom in the sense of recreating the studio environment. And also the fact that, for architecture, what's very important is that the work of the students, we always ask the students, the work is public, and so the work is up for review, for critique, and for be able to be reviewed by everybody, I mean, within the classroom. So Miro is one particular technology that is able to provide that type of visual environment.
Once you make the work public, the stakes go up, right?
Yes.
And the quality goes up and the excitement goes up.
Yes. So the way, that's the first thing that help the students, like the critique, what we call critique in the School of Architecture, it's really part of the pedagogy and part of the way in which the students progress in the work through iteration, as I was saying earlier at the beginning.
Right. Vanessa has a question, I think.
Hey, Marcella. First,
Hi,
I'd like to
Vanessa.
thank you so much for these forums. I was a little surprised to see I was the only one joining, but I really appreciate this time to kind of hear a little bit more in-depth conversation about, how the classes, how the semester has gone and whatnot. But the word research means so much in different contexts. So I'm curious at the graduate level,
Mm-hmm.
what is really working? I mean, is it original research? Is it formal, historical research? Like, what are the students really, what is the expectation?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Vanessa. So that's a great question. And so research, I think, can be done in different ways and through different platforms and tools and processes, particularly within the framework of the studio that I taught in the fall and I'm currently teaching. We started, which is the studio in the graduate program in Denmark. I actually started working with the students in the summer already, and asking them to formulate first the research question. So not really looking for, so really starting from one sentence. Yeah. So what is the research question and how you begin to create the platform? And now we can talk about the platform around the research question. So really starting from one sentence and based on their interest, and from that begin to build the scaffolding, let's say, around the research. So how did we do that? So we did it through, I would say, 2 to 3 layers. So layer number 1, the students looked at books, looked at articles, so looking at literature review. So I asked them specifically to support the thinking, not to support the thinking, but to support the research question through rigorous readings, looking through readings, and how this, in a way, the research question was supported or not. And in the end, as you can imagine, the research question, changed throughout the semester. And
part of that iteration.
Yes, so that's the interesting part. And also what we used mapping. So I especially in the fall, I asked the students specifically, you have to design your research in the same way you design any, let's say, space or building. So the idea of designing the research it triggers the question of what are the tools that you need in order for you to create the scaffolding to support your research and develop the research. So particularly we worked through a set of readings, books that the students researched and looked specifically, but also we use mapping as well to extract and understand to a graphic format the important components of their research. So mapping, I see in this particular context, we use mapping as an active tool for research.
Right.
Because I think students might be overwhelmed. They have more, lot of books and lots of readings. But the question is how you begin to synthesize into something that it's a visual construct.
It's amazing the leap of the interfaces for manipulation. It used to be very, you'd have to pull in data sets from all over. And now it's so much easier to aggregate those data sets and understand the definitions and the variables. So the jump that I've seen in that technology, and it sounds like you're taking full advantage of it. I mean, it's fantastic. And I always wonder, what is the fundamental point for the students to, especially for design and architecture, what is the fundamental point for them to start with that? And I wonder, if you'll see that mapping as part of the visualization in the future.
I see mapping. So I'm more interested not only the, visualizing, yes, of course, visualizing because it's a tool, let's say, to communicate. But I see it more as those maps as a generative tools for thinking. And of course, can be done in many ways. But in the context of this particular studio, mapping was developed more for them to extract important data sets or information or other important elements to continue to design the research and to lead directly to the design scenarios that they are developing. So it's been, it's going to end in a couple of weeks as we go through the final, but I would say a pretty rigorous process going from the designing the research to defining the scenarios of the design. So how many different type of scenarios students can develop within the research question. And then now in the spring, we're actually each student is developing one project.
Yeah.
So it's a year-long journey.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
I think Fran is on mute.
Fran is on mute. Marcella, I can't thank you enough for talking to me today. This has been really fascinating.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
so thank you to everyone who joined us today. We've been speaking with Marcella Del Signore, Associate Professor in Architecture in the School of Architecture and Design as part of our Great Teaching series. The conversation's been recorded and will be available on the Center for Teaching and Learning webpage, nyit.edu/CTL. If you would like to be featured in the Great Teaching series, please email the Center for Teaching and Learning at ctl@nyit.edu or fill out the form at bit.ly/great-teaching. Thank you so much.
Thank you.